Hello, hello, and welcome to Managing Up, Navigating the VISTA Supervisor Relationship. This webinar aims to provide you with practical tips and advice for managing and communicating up with your supervisor. My name is Chris Hawks, and I'm joined by Barbara Reynolds. We will be your host today from the VISTA headquarters in Washington, D.C. You will also see our AmeriCorps VISTA colleague, Khadijah Carr, on the webinar, who will be assisting with the Q&A, as well as our partners at LSI, Julian Colby, who will be assisting in the chat and Q&A through the session.
Great. Hey, everybody. This is Barbara Reynolds. It is my pleasure to be here alongside Chris Hawks as well and his delightful AmeriDog. I'm hoping you all are appreciating the visual here. This is the sweet Paloma, I believe, that you're seeing with Chris. So as I said, I'm excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to talking about how to develop a strong and productive working relationship with your VISTA supervisor. I joined VISTA staff just last October and have the great pleasure of working alongside Chris, though I've never met Paloma, sadly, and our other training unit colleagues as well. So good times here at VISTA Training HQ. Before coming to Team VISTA, I worked in the great state of Maryland as an AmeriCorps program director and a VISTA project manager for a number of years. So I've been in the role of VISTA supervisor as well as AmeriCorps member supervisor for most of my career, most of my adult career. In that time, I've supervised about 500 different members, staff, contractors, volunteers, et cetera. Lots of good stories and good experiences with folks, and I really love to share this information and to talk about this. I will tell you as a supervisor that I have made a lot of mistakes over the years and tried very hard to learn from them, though I do keep making them and learning from them. And I definitely want to share with you some of those experiences today, and I'm happy to share any information if you have questions about this being a supervisor for VISTAs. One of my favorite sayings is something like, if you can't be a role model, then at least you can serve as a cautionary tale. And I think in a lot of ways, my experience as a supervisor is more cautionary tale than role model. But I think from that can often come the best learning. So as I said, I'll try to share some of that information with you and take questions. I do think that the supervisor-supervisee relationship can be intense in the workplace. Hopefully today's discussion will help you better understand the supervisor role in general, what we're looking for in VISTA supervisors, as well as talk about ways that you and your supervisor may work effectively and you may develop or strengthen your managing up skills. So that's just a quick introduction. As I said, everyone here at VISTA headquarters, we're so excited that you're on today and so excited to be talking about this information with you on today's session. So coming up, you'll see the agenda for what Chris and I are going to be covering as we go through our time with you this afternoon. I will say it's good to know our assumption in this content and this presentation is that the listeners, those of you on the phone and online with us, that you're pretty new in your tenure as VISTAs, that you haven't necessarily been in your sites or your projects for a long, long time. So we're starting very much from a beginning place. This presentation is going to cover it's going to define, first of all, what we mean by managing up. We'll talk about different ways for engaging in good managing up practices to build strong relationships. We'll talk about communication strategies and then hopefully share with you resources that we know about and tools that we've seen VISTAs use over the years to be really successful. So we hope to explore different ways to address some common challenges. I would say over the years we've heard some stories from VISTAs about their work with their supervisors and stories from supervisors, so we want to talk with you guys about that, hopefully provide some practical solutions for improving communications or addressing any challenges, and then also talk about some common myths about managing, about your supervisor relationship and how to address those. So lots of good stuff to go through today. Before Chris and I jump in too much, I just want to pause for a second and get you engaged, get folks on the phone and online, and just get a little bit of input from you about the term managing up. So if you could, in the chat box, just, a few words. You don't have to give full sentences or worry about making it grammatically correct. I just want to get a sense from you when you hear the term managing up, what comes to mind for you? So if you could just take a minute. I see some folks are typing in different kinds of answers. You hopefully can see in the chat panel as well. You can see folks are typing in their responses. You can see, yep, question mark, what is managing up? I think someone is asking. That's great. Working with your manager for a healthy relationship. Yep, developing good working relationships. Teamwork and transparency, nice. Thanks, Lakeisha. Great. Thank you very much. Keep them coming. I see lots of typing going on there. So for our purposes, we think about managing up in a particular way, right? So when we use the term managing up, we are in many ways thinking as you've written in the chat box, right? We are talking about how to build a productive relationship and how to build strong communication. And the quote that you see on the slide, I think, is a really nice way of defining what we mean by managing up. So here's one definition, right? In an article called Managing Your Boss, which is really interesting. If you have not read it yet, I highly recommend it. The quote is this: managing up is the process of consciously working with your boss to obtain the best possible results for you, your boss, and your organization. Managing up, or this is not political maneuvering or kissing up. Rather, it's a deliberate effort to bring understanding and cooperation to a relationship between individuals who often have different perspectives. And my only edit I would make to this quote, I do think it's really well stated, is at the very end where it reads, who often have different perspectives. In my experience, it should read, who always have different perspectives. That as human beings, we, in any relationship, we all always bring our own unique perspectives, and I think that's true. That's as true for VISTA as it is in every other way. So I like this quote, and I think it's helpful to frame our discussion today. I think it shows that at the heart of managing up, that term and this concept, the heart of it is really all about communicating well. And it's about advocating for yourself, you the VISTA, or you the supervisor if you're in a supervisor role, so that you can be happy, you can be productive, and you can have really strong relationships. So hopefully this quote and some of this explanation gives a little sense of the context and the definition for managing up. I do want to pull out, as you can see on the slide in front of you, I did highlight 3 words in this quote that I especially like, and those words are relationship between individuals. And I want to say just anecdotally here, and in all frankness, I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned as a supervisor of humans, not just VISTAs, is that the role of being a supervisor and being a person who reports to a supervisor, which I also am, is actually, and at its heart, always a relationship. And that, for me, is something that I keep learning year after year and team after team, because I think it's important in my head, at least, and I try to talk this way with my colleagues, is that the relationship between individuals, parts of managing up to me, has a lot of connotations. It means that, it's a relationship because we are engaged in a common dynamic, a common goal. We're spending a lot of time together. I know I spend more time with my coworkers, frankly, than I do with my husband, and that has always been true. My work relationships are intense. They're complicated. These are human dynamics. There's never an easy black or white answer in work relationships or any relationships. And in my experience, work relationships are complicated, right? I find for myself and the folks that I've worked for and who've reported to me over the years that all of the emotions that any relationship, any human relationship has, from love to hate to jealousy to sorrow, I mean, really the kind of full range of the rainbow of human emotions come to the workplace. They come to any type of working relationship. And so I think that that's something that's always good to keep in our minds. as we're talking about building our communication and building these strong relationships, that they really are relationships like every other one we have in our lives. So if it's relationships with your family, with your friends, with your spouses, with your delightful dog Paloma, although I doubt Chris has to have the communication talk.
You'd be shocked.
I'm sure she's very smart. I can see that. But the notion of being in a relationship and having to invest time and effort in the same way for your work relationships as you do in all other places. Again, to me, that's an important concept that I keep in my mind and I want to keep in our minds today as we're talking this through. I think, relationship building as well, I think can mean different things to different people in the same way that the term managing up can. For my purposes, when I'm talking about relationship building and I'm thinking about my relationship with my supervisor, my relationship with my team, and any of the teams that I've worked with over the years, the relationship is about being connected, right? You're in a relationship when there's some sort of connection, some sort of purpose. There's a reason that your hand is joined with your supervisor's hand in this work relationship. So I think a really important question for all of us is, what is the connection? What is that thing that brings your hand together with your supervisor? What do you have in common? What is the thing that you are sharing in this work life that we are all sharing together? And so we're not going to post answers to that question, but I just want to pose it to you here and to share a little bit with you. And when I'm thinking about the connection that I have with my current supervisor, for instance, I know that she and I absolutely share 100%, no doubt in my mind, a dedication to VISTA's service and to VISTA members. I know no matter how we disagree on any of the elements of our work, at the end of the day, we are both always looking for the best outcome for the VISTA program and for our VISTA members. And so whenever I found a situation where we are in disagreement or when we're debating something, I will often say, I'm so dedicated to being a force of good in our work, and I really want you to know that even though we're disagreeing, that's my dedication. So I think that it's helpful if you do have something that you know or that you can find that connects you to your supervisor. It's really worth that effort, and it's worth keeping that in your mind, as I said, at any point, but certainly as we're talking today and as we're moving forward. So a lot of good, hopefully helpful context there, just to give you a sense of where Chris and I are starting from. We talked a little bit about what we mean by managing up and what we mean by relationship building and kind of where we're coming at this in our world together. We're going to start now and talk a little bit about myths of managing up. And I think in any situation, it's helpful to look at some specific issues, things that we may have heard ourselves in our work lives, we may have heard from VISTAs. Certainly some of these comments have come up in some way in the chat panel. So there's definitely some myths, I think, that we're already starting to think about. So that is the next step on our agenda.
And continuing with, or starting with these myths, I should say, is myth number 1. Managing up is telling my supervisor how to do her job. So, not so. Managing up is all about communicating, asking questions, and clarifying expectations to foster a productive working relationship. It's also about creating a shared understanding of projects, timelines, direction, and vision, which ensures that you're able to meet your supervisor's expectations. Likewise, your relationship with your supervisor is about collaborating to maximize outcomes, which you can do better together. So really, managing up is about being easy to supervise. I think it's important to emphasize that the VISTA supervisor relationship, like any relationship, is a partnership. We saw some of that in the chat just recently from a couple of members. It's about doing your part to make sure you're aligned with your supervisor's expectations and the goals of the organization you're serving with.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so next up, myth number 2, we have the myth of it's my supervisor's job to manage, so I don't have to, I meaning the VISTA. Believe it or not, very few supervisors actually receive training on how to supervise. It is an uncommon, I think, academic background that folks bring. So supervisors can really use your help and guidance and information, frankly, as Chris just mentioned. One way that you can help manage is to be easy to manage. Also, even though you may not manage other people right now, in this particular position, you are absolutely a manager of yourself, right? You have your own personal leadership and initiative in the organization, and taking that initiative can go a long way and really help you be a better learner and worker at your particular project. So personal leadership in this context just means you in your existing role will help others who work with you. You'll be collaborative and you'll communicate well so that others know how to help you succeed.
Myth number 3, I can never manage my supervisor. So the truth is that your supervisor cannot read your mind and they don't know everything. Managers often share that managing is easier if the people they supervise actually communicate their needs and advocate for themselves. So believe it or not, managing people is hard and managers struggle too. Some of the common challenges they experience include delegating, giving constructive feedback, focusing on the big picture, projecting confidence, and perhaps surprisingly, getting support from above or managing up, in other words. It seems a bit crazy, but supervisors have the same questions and challenges around managing up as many of you do. So the bottom line is that you are smart. They selected you for this project because they had confidence in your abilities. They need you and they are relying on you to help them help you be successful. So now that we've discussed a few of the managing up myths, let's talk about some of the real-life managing up challenges that you are currently experienced or have struggled with during your VISTA year. So we're going to ask another chat question. Please respond to the question, are you experiencing any challenges in your relationship with your supervisor? If so, what is the challenge? You can enter it in the chat box at the top right, again, just to the top right of the screen, and we're just going to read through some of these while you're typing them in. Not enough structure, having a hard time understanding my supervisor's expectations, that's a big one. I see the word communication popping up quite a bit. Multiple supervisors, we will touch on that. Structure again.
Workload, yep, definitely. Managers overloaded with their job, yep.
Switching supervisors, yep, that can happen mid-service, certainly.
Thanks.
Yeah.
A couple folks saying they're not having challenges, that's awesome.
That is great. So please, yeah, keep those coming. Keep those answers coming, and we'll refer to some of those throughout the session as well. And thank you for answering that. And some themes have certainly popped up that we see, some that we will certainly touch on in these coming slides. I have a few common challenges that myself and Barbara are going to address on what VISTAs have said in the past, on past webinars such as this, and emails to us and just private conversations. And we'll have an opportunity during the Q&A at the end to discuss any other challenges that maybe you have come up with at your site and want to discuss.
Great, thank you. So Chris and I are going to segue now into some common challenges. Again, true stories, no real names will be shared. I am noting, however, that I get to start us off with my supervisor is scary because I think Chris Hawks is telling me something with this assignment, and that's okay. So scary is, can mean many things to many people. In this context, my supervisor is scary. Some stories that have come up, I would say, for VISTAs are that, their supervisor appears to be intimidating or grumpy or brash. Again, I feel that all these adjectives apply to me. So, what do you do if you're a VISTA in that particular kind of situation? And I didn't see any scary supervisors in the chat, but that doesn't mean you didn't type it in. I just may not have missed it. So what do you do if you feel like and you find your supervisor to be scary? First step, I think a good place to start is always to check your assumptions. Check the assumptions that you may be making about your supervisor, right? What is it about her that is scary specifically? What has happened that's making you have this experience or making you think this? How you're perceiving the scary supervisor may not be what she's intending. I will definitely speak for myself in this, that I never intentionally want to be scary, but I'm definitely not a morning person. So I've been grumpy before 8 a.m. for sure. So it's possible your supervisor, a scary supervisor, may not know that they're being scary in whatever way that means to you. It could be they have a really frank communication style that comes across as too direct, or can feel insensitive to you. As I just mentioned, I'm not a morning person, and I'm certainly scary before 8 a.m. Could be any number of reasons why the behaviors are occurring that you're seeing and you're experiencing as scary. So one way is to kind of check that and see what's going on. Again, I think it's useful if you, in any of the situations with your supervisor, if you can try to be specific and really pinpoint what is the behavior that you're perceiving as scary, and try to make sure you're not basing your impression or basing your relationship with your supervisor on one particularly memorable or frankly negative experience. I find that it's sometimes can be there could be a risk of having one bad interaction with a supervisor or coworker, or due to the coffee shop. Like, there can be one bad moment that comes to define the entire relationship, and I think there's a risk of that in any human relationship, and I think in the workplace, in my experience, there's a high risk of that, and I think I've certainly made decisions about supervisors based on one particularly negative dynamic. I've had those decisions made about me as a supervisor, so I think it's a tough place to be in. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about other people and their intentions are not correct, or the picture's not really complete, and it's worth starting to question how we got to this. How did I get to the place of thinking my supervisor is scary, if that makes sense? So on a related note, still talking about the scary supervisor, could be one way to have the supervisor be less scary or less stressful for you is if you know, or if you can find out what the supervisor's hot buttons are, right? Like in the example I just gave you, not being a morning person, I feel like I'm pretty vocal about that. But for folks who don't know me or who are working with me new, that is not something that they know, and it really is a hot button. If someone comes at me at 7:15 in the morning and they need a lot of answers and really trying to engage, that's gonna not go well for anyone. So I think trying to figure out what your supervisor's hot buttons are, I think that can really help significantly improve the relationship if you're able to work around that. So you may be thinking, that's great, how do I find out what my supervisor's hot buttons are without getting the scary horns like on the slide? I think the first recommendation, of course, is to put your detective eyeballs on, really observe the supervisor's behavior, interactions over time, and try to get a sense of what's going on there. And then second, of course, good advice is always to ask, right? I think it is often the case that the best kind of frankest, most direct question can really jumpstart or cause a major improvement in your relationship. So asking something like, what's your biggest pet peeve at work, or even more specifically, what advice do you have for me to avoid irritating you, right? To you, my supervisor, I really don't want to irritate you. How can I not do that? My answer immediately to that question would be, please do not ask me for anything before 7, before 8 a.m., unless it's an emergency. So I think just asking directly, looking at ways, to build a communication, and just being that direct with folks, I tell you, it's a gift. I think it's, as I said, it's pretty uncommon for team members to ask something that explicit. How can I not irritate you? And I just think it's a great step to take if you feel comfortable doing it. I think it can be really awesome, and can help you gather more information, help build your awareness of what your supervisor's hot buttons are, and all of that hopefully will give you more information to help you overcome this particular challenge if you find yourself in it. All right, one last point on scary supervisors. Wow, I'm really spending a lot of time on this. Clearly, I have a lot of thoughts about scary supervisors. Okay, finding out the hot buttons, checking your assumptions about what it is that's causing you to feel this person is scary. Finally, asking for feedback specifically can often be a way to get around some of the scariness. One-on-one meetings, kind of regularly scheduled supervisory meetings, are a great way and a great opportunity for you to ask for feedback. This could be a regular part of those standing meetings with your supervisor. It kind of gives you space to check some of those assumptions, get feedback on how you're interacting, if you're following the guidance or the advice that your supervisor gave you. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in those one-on-one meetings. If you need more feedback, you want to go further, you can also, again, be really specific in your questions. Things like, what would you like to see in the future around this project? What specifically would you like me to change? How do you recommend I approach this? So really asking good follow-up questions about the feedback from your supervisor can help deepen it, help deepen the communication, and improve your relationship. And then in this mix as well, asking for feedback, I also recommend that you give feedback to your supervisor. Certainly it is always, it can be uncomfortable to give constructive criticism or negative feedback to your supervisor, so I recommend you warm up to that. You warm up to giving negative feedback slowly, but I do think it's important if you have needs that aren't getting met, if you're having problems at your project site, if there's something you really need from your supervisor that you're not getting, I think giving that feedback to the person directly is super helpful and really, really, again, it's a great gift that you would be giving. I think feedback, both constructive criticism as well as positive feedback, super, super helpful for supervisors. As you're getting more comfortable, you might be able to let the supervisor know that they came across as scary. Like, I think it took me a few years with one of my teammates years ago, but she finally did tell me how intimidating that she had found me originally to work with, and I was shocked by that. I had no idea that that's what she felt, and it was really helpful for her to tell me that, and then we, of course, made jokes about it for years to come, and I intentionally tried to scare her, which I think was not the right approach, but it was fun for me. So, all right, so we're leaving the scary supervisor. Hopefully none of this applies to anyone on this call, but in case it did, moving on to something else.
So another common challenge, my supervisor is super busy and doesn't have time for me. This is very common. So what's that you say? Your supervisor is so busy that they don't have any time for you throughout the day? Yeah, we've heard it. It's a common challenge experienced by VISTA, and it's a challenge experienced by most people who have a supervisor, period. Whether it's because they have a big job, they are part-time, they are covering for other staff, or all of the above. Supervisors are some of the busiest people around. There are only 24 hours in a day, so how can you make this work considering that we're all strapped for time and resources? Well, first you'll need to actually ask for a meeting, and don't take no for an answer. This might sound a little risky, but we're serious and the risk is worth the reward. Your supervisor should make time for you, and you might be able to help them make time to fit you in. And a couple of suggestions possibly to help you go about this. First, we would say strategize and prioritize. Make sure you're spending your precious time with your supervisor on your top priorities. Also, you should take charge of the meetings. Bring an agenda and start with your agenda items. And depending on your supervisor's personality, it may be really helpful to send your meeting agenda with discussion points and or decisions needed in advance, just a quick email. This can give your supervisor time to consider alternatives and be ready at your meeting with the information or decisions you need. Also, make sure to solicit clear expectations and priorities. Most supervisors do not spell out their expectations, and the burden of discovery falls on those who report to them. So don't wait for your supervisor to provide you with this information, and instead just initiate a series of informal discussions on possibly our objectives or your vision, which is helping your supervisor clarify and communicate his or her ideas. And make sure you communicate your own ideas as well. And continuing on that, be sure to provide adequate information to your supervisor. Update him or her early and often. A well-informed supervisor can be a strong advocate for your needs or make the best decisions for your projects and the organization. I also recommend coming to your supervisor with solutions and not only problems. You may not know all the answers, but coming with a few solutions to a challenge you're facing will show them that you've thought it through, and they'll likely be more willing and able to help you brainstorm additional options and kind of pick off on what you've already started and maybe advance upon those answers to implement the solution. Also, be sure to relay good and bad news, and don't surprise your supervisor. Remember that your supervisor has a supervisor too, and that they are responsible to that person. As a manager, it doesn't feel good to have your boss tell you about a mistake or sometimes even good news about their own team if that's the first time they're hearing about it. So it makes managers feel disconnected, possibly vulnerable. So don't put your supervisor in that situation, and make sure they know about everything that's happening with your project, including both the good and maybe not so good. Another great tip is to match your communication method to your supervisor's preference. Do they prefer email, Skype, in-person meetings, quick texts, or maybe even walking meetings in between other meetings? By varying your communication method, you can create a great way to really snag time with your supervisor if they can't sit down with you or don't have the time to sit down for you for a full 30 minutes at a time. If you need to talk to them, send them an informational email in the morning and then walk them to an afternoon meeting, walk alongside them, maybe a quick talk here and there, just to get that information that you really need to get for that day. Finally, follow up after you have a conversation to check for understanding and to make sure that you document who's doing what so that everyone is accountable. Clear communication is also just a great way to build trust with your supervisor. We saw communication, that word popped up quite a bit in this chat, and it's so true. If you communicate well, they know what they can expect from you, and they know that you are making every attempt to make sure that they have all the information they need to be successful themselves as well as the organization. A great tool for facilitating communication is the one-on-one meeting. And we'll discuss one-on-one best practices in a bit, but if you're not already having formal one-on-ones with your supervisor, we highly recommend asking for this time with them if possible. It's a great opportunity to update your supervisor on your project, your VAD, learn about their agenda, and build your relationship.
So another common managing up challenge is when a supervisor takes the no news is good news approach to managing, which means that they only communicate with you if there's a problem. If this is you, if this is a situation that you are currently in with a supervisor or have been in the past, you're definitely not alone. It's a pretty common management technique, right? And I think there are a lot of reasons why supervisors take this approach. Of course, as Chris was just noting, and you guys, a number of you typed in the chat box as well, your supervisor may be overly busy. Their plate may be too full, they may be too stretched, and so unless you're on fire, they're not going to pay attention, right? Like they've got to put their attention where the other fires are. So it could be that they're super busy. Could be that the no news is good news approach is taken because the supervisor doesn't want to give direct feedback. It's not something they like to do, to give constructive criticism. They don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. Could be no news is good news approach is taken because the supervisor is trying to avoid micromanaging, right? They're trying to be hands-off and let you take the lead, and it feels to you, or it seems as if they've gone too far. They've swung to the other side of the spectrum and been too hands-off. Or it could just be that your supervisor knows that you're awesome and they have a lot of confidence in you, and they don't think that you need a lot of hands-on management or close management. And then certainly it could be any combination of those reasons, right, that a supervisor takes this no news is good news approach. Regardless, I think at best this approach can be frustrating. It can be exasperating. At worst, it can create a culture where folks walk around on eggshells because they're trying not to get noticed. They're trying not to attract the supervisor's attention because it means you're in some sort of trouble or that you've done something wrong, and that's obviously not a way that we want to be in our work lives. So don't despair if any of this sounds familiar to you. There are definitely strategies you can try to counter this tactic, to be visible in a good way, to get information you need and get your supervisor's attention when you need it and when it's going to be most useful for you. A lot of the strategies that work for a busy boss also work with the no news is good news supervisor. As Chris was just noting, you can catch your supervisor in between times by things like, as he indicated, walking alongside a person to a meeting or to some sort of event, getting questions answered in that way. I can tell you firsthand, this is one of my #1 strategies with my current supervisor, Eileen Conaboy, who is a constantly moving target. So I shark her, and I tell her I'm sharking her, and I hang out around outside of her door, or I literally follow her to meetings to ask questions and to get things when there's something that's really pressing. So I think that strategy of trying to grab folks in those in-between times, I know that can be effective. That's not going to be as much as you need, obviously, all the time. Try to grab coffee with your supervisor. That can also be helpful if you have time. If you take any trips together, if you're going out to do a site visit or some other event and you're commuting together, that can be a great time to catch up if you're in a car, on a train together, or just trying to grab a few minutes after a meeting that you know they're going to be at, like a staff meeting. That can be helpful as well. So by taking advantage of these in-between moments, you can get a lot of information that you need, obviously, in like bite-sized chunks, right? So these few moments, hopefully, will be useful for you. They'll, of course, require you to really strategize on what your most burning needs are, your most burning questions. So you can get feedback, or you can get answers to questions that you need. We know time is precious for everyone, so we want you to feel like whether you have the full 30 minutes or just smaller chunks of time, that it's going to be useful for you. And then finally, one strategy of trying to get the attention in a good way, the positive attention of a no news is good news supervisor, is to ask about herself. I think asking about her approach to work, to try to get at that connection you might be able to build, asking about her experience at the organization, her experience in the community. I mean, those types of open-ended questions can often get you a few moments and give you some information that you can really use. And while you're at it, if you feel that it's appropriate, share information about yourself as well.
And then we have the I have 12 supervisors challenge, which we hear quite a bit as well. And maybe not 12, that might be a bit of an exaggeration. I certainly hope so. Haven't seen that number pop up, but we certainly see a lot of VISTAs come and say, hey, I have 2 or 3 people I need to report to, so what's going on? Who do I report to? So sometimes it can feel like too many, obviously a real challenge. And even if they're both, for example, if you have 2 and they're both awesome supervisors, expectations may collide or mismatch. They may not be communicating with each other, or they both may think they're your #1 supervisor and their assignment should take priority over the other. So what can you do to work within this situation? Well, we would recommend frequent communication, again, that C word, communication, and documentation and follow-up to make sure everyone is on the same page. This might look like copying all your supervisors on informational or project-specific emails, keeping great meeting notes and perhaps storing them electronically where everyone can access them, or maybe emailing meeting notes out to all your supervisors just afterwards. Also, you can always ask your supervisors to talk to each other. It's totally okay to discuss the concerns you have about feeling maybe pulled in different directions or possibly having conflicting priorities. If this is the case, it's likely your supervisors just don't realize it, or realize that this is happening, and hopefully they'll take steps together to figure it out. Also, the positive spin on this is that now you have more mentors, a larger network, and several potentially excellent references afterwards. So it's possible that having more than one supervisor will turn out to be a great opportunity, even if it's a challenge, especially as you finish out your VISTA year and are looking forward to what's next.
Great. So one more common challenge. I'm ending strong. Started with scary and I'm ending with no boundaries. Okay. So, the no boundaries supervisor. I, again, hope this is not a situation you find yourselves in right now, but I've absolutely been in this situation before VISTA, and have worked with AmeriCorps members who found themselves in this situation with supervisors at their project sites. Honestly, it's one of the hardest dynamics to manage, right? Because it can be really uncomfortable depending on what boundaries are being crossed. And in this situation, I'm really talking about verbal boundaries, your supervisor using language or just sharing information with you that feels like it's going beyond your boundaries. So I just want to clarify what we're talking about. Could be that your supervisor or someone you work with shares, overshares, right? Shares a lot about their personal life, their politics, their religious views. I mean, that, again, depending on who you are and where you are, that can get awkward really fast. And I think it's a dynamic that can really cause challenges in the workplace. So there can be hope, I think, along the lines of Chris and I talking with you a moment ago about folks not knowing how they're coming across or not understanding the impact of their behavior. I think this can be true here as well. It can certainly be tricky to try to give your supervisor feedback or try to express that they are, a little bit out of bounds on the way that they're talking to you, but it's definitely worth the effort. So there are a lot of variations, a lot of tools for how you can do this. There's one good model that we use called the COIN conversation model, and so I'm just going to walk through this quickly for you as well. So COIN, as you can see, just an acronym that stands for connection, observation, impact on you, and next steps. Using the COIN method, you're encouraged, and if you find yourself in a situation where you think your supervisor's language has gone beyond your bounds and you want to articulate that, then start by making a connection with your supervisor to indicate why you are bringing this topic up. To the extent that you can be addressing a situation immediately in real time, that's, of course, preferred. It's not always possible. If you can bring up the situation right away and make that connection, that's very helpful. Next, of course, the model encourages you to note what exactly is happening. So what is the boundary? What is the language? What's the concern that you have? And what does this mean to you? What's the impact on you? And then finally, what are the next steps that you want to see or that you want to talk about so that you're not in this position in the future and you can feel that you're in a better communication relationship. So I will say there are a number of resources beyond this one communication tool for you if this type of one-on-one conversation doesn't seem like it's going to work. And Chris and I, near the end of our presentation today, will talk about additional resources to help get you through sticky situations. So I just want to share a couple of quick examples of language you could use, and obviously this may not be super comfortable in your mouth of saying these words, but I just want to indicate what the COIN conversation model could look like in a couple of supervisory situations. So the first one is if you have a no-boundary supervisor, so just to go back to that common challenge. The COIN example, the statement could sound something like, I care about your happiness, I'm glad you feel you can trust me. However, when you talk about your tender profile, it makes me uncomfortable, and I feel like it interferes with our professional relationship. I can certainly hear myself saying those words. I don't want to hear about your tender profile. I want to get to know you, though, my supervisor, but that's a little too personal. I'd love to hear more about your kids or your hobbies, or in my case with Chris Hawks, his dog Paloma. Can we start there? So again, these exact words may not be comfortable for you, but I hope that you can see in them the 4 elements of the COIN example, right? So first of all, you're reaching out, indicating what is the connection. You care about this person, you want them to be happy, and you're indicating that you also care about your relationship. You're noting the specific behavior. They're talking to you about their tender profile. You're talking about what that means to you. You feel like it interferes with your professional relationship. It makes you uncomfortable. Full stop. You don't need to explain anything more than that. And then you're recommending or requesting next steps that include, again, circling back to your connection, right? I want to get to know you. I want to, have this professional relationship, and I'd love, here are my limits, or here's where I'd like to start. I'd like to talk about your kids or your hobbies. Unless, of course, your hobby is your tender profile, in which case I'm out. But I think this, again, is general language, but meant to demonstrate the 4 elements of the COIN model. So just one more quickly. I think a lot of times we'll hear from VISTAs, and I've had in my experience, that supervisors don't always make it to those regularly scheduled meetings. That for whatever reason they get pulled off, and they have to cancel, or they're no-shows to meetings with VISTAs or with other folks. So in this example, the language could sound something like, I really care about our work together and making the biggest impact I can during my service. I'm concerned because you've canceled our last 2 check-ins. These meetings are important to me, and I have a few different things to cover so we can keep moving forward. As you know, we have a big fundraiser. There are a lot of decisions to be made. And then the next steps in this scenario is a check-in with the supervisor to see, does the timing of our weekly meetings still work for you? Is there something about your schedule we should consider changing? So again, I don't know if this language is particularly applicable or useful for you, but I think it's a scenario you may find yourself in, and particularly with the VISTA schedule, the timeline, I think missing those meetings can be something that's really troublesome for VISTAs. So I hope that those 2 examples, and that the model, the COIN model, is useful in thinking about any of the situations we've talked about with supervisors, including the no boundaries supervisor.
Great. And then so now we're going to transition a bit from managing up challenges and talk about a specific intervention that we've already mentioned during this presentation. So we want to ask a poll question to everyone, and you see the question on the webinar screen right now is whether, do you have regular one-on-ones with your direct supervisor? And you'll see the response options are yes, we meet but not regularly, I rarely meet with my supervisor, I never meet with my supervisor, and what's a one-on-one meeting? Hopefully it's not the final one. So you'll see that poll towards the bottom of the slides. Just take a minute to go through that. And so when we say one-on-one, we're talking about in our opinion, one of the best options for building a productive VISTA supervisor relationship. But, we'll go into a little more detail in the next coming slides and a couple of tools that could be used. But we're just looking at these results as they come in to kind of get an idea of where everyone is at. Do see a good percentage who are saying yes, and that's a good thing. Yep. And 0 who are asking what a one-on-one meeting. Yes, that's great. And we do have, I guess, second place, we meet but not regularly, and that's pretty common from VISTAs. We're actually going to leave this up for anyone else to, for another slide, for anyone else to respond, and then we'll kind of check back in on it after that. So for one-on-one meeting best practices, we want to acknowledge that we know all of you are supposed to be having one-on-one meetings with your supervisor, and that's a general requirement of VISTA. However, we also want to acknowledge that what we're supposed to do isn't always what we do. It isn't always necessarily possible, and sometimes it isn't the appropriate or best thing to do. And so something being required doesn't always mean it's realistic or relevant, especially on a reoccurring common basis, if there's some of those challenges, such as the challenge we talked about with my supervisor has no time. So, however, this doesn't mean that your supervisor is off the hook in these situations. They should be meeting with you, and we want to recognize that life gets in the way of our best intentions sometimes. So with all that said, let's spend a moment talking about one-on-ones, because we think it's one of your best resources for getting the attention you need from your supervisor, and it's something that you can ask for, you can easily set up, and you can lead the meeting without asking too much from your supervisor. So best practices for ensuring successful one-on-one meetings include one-on-one meetings should be held weekly or as often as possible for 30 minutes. It's a good example. Or they should be scheduled at a regular, consistent time and are rarely missed. It's also a good guideline. In addition, the primary focus for the one-on-one meeting is on you, the VISTA, and you should always make sure to take great notes and follow up on any action items afterwards. So we want to be sure to mention that the tool that's linked here, that website, well, first off, that link is included in the handouts to download, so you don't need to necessarily copy that or take a screenshot or anything. It's in the document to the right in the handouts. But we want to just mention that that specific link on the slide is somewhat geared towards managers, meaning it's intended for supervisors to use during a one-on-one meeting with their employees. But the one-on-one meeting approach it's easily transformed, or you can turn it around, switch it so that you can use it on the employee side very easily, and that's why we're recommending it. And just wanted to point that out. So we're going to dive into the actual one-on-one meeting approach, which describes how the time during this meeting should be spent.
Great. So the tool that we recommend, and I think this report can be super effective, is the 10-10-10 approach. In this scenario, this is assuming a 30-minute meeting with your supervisor, and it's broken into 3 10-minute sections. The first 10-minute block is for you, the VISTA member, and it is you're leading this part of the meeting. These are your agenda items, your questions, etc. You go first in the 30-minute meeting. This ensures, if you go first, that you get your answers to your questions and that you have time to provide the information that you want to get across in that meeting. As you can see, the second 10-minute chunk is time for the supervisor's agenda items. I saw a couple of folks commented in the chat box that you go to your meetings with your list of discussion items. Your supervisor brings his list. This is the place in the 10-10-10 model right there in the middle for the supervisor's agenda items. The great thing about this model, and one of the secrets, is that by having you go first, right, you getting those first 10 minutes, that first 10-minute chunk, it ensures that your supervisor won't monopolize the meeting, right? If you are not starting out with your supervisor and then spending the whole 30 minutes there, you get to go through your items. It's likely your discussion items will also have been on the supervisor's agenda, so you can check those off and not have to deal with them again. And it can just really help you, really focus on the particular questions that you have by going first. And then finally, the third block of time you see is for career development, and this means for you and your position, growing your skills while you're serving, thinking about life after VISTA, all the different possible opportunities, things that you may want to be looking at as you are developing your relationship with your supervisor. All right. So here on the screen you can see just a few relationship building questions. These again are, I would say, really applicable and relevant for VISTAs who are early in their terms of service, so you're really at the beginning stages of your relationship with your supervisor. Having said that, though, I think these can be tweaked. No matter where you are in your VISTA term, you can adapt these questions to be relevant. So, asking right out of the gate of your supervisor, what's your preferred mode of communication? How do you want me to update you? And when? Like, what frequency do you want updates? What are your expectations of this project? What can I handle on my own, and what needs your approval? That's a great question to ask, just to get a sense of your own level of authority and things that you'll be in charge of by yourself. How often do you want updates? As I said, I think that's a great question for the supervisor if they don't tell you that up front, if that's not really clear to you. Similarly, if it's not clear to you what the top priorities for your project are early on, these are just great direct questions, as Chris and I have said, that can be really helpful just to spark the conversation with your supervisor. We do know with asking these questions and trying to sync up your awareness and your expectation, that can really help your supervisor explain his agenda or where he's coming from in this. It means you can possibly align your tasks really well and really quickly with his agenda or with his interests in the project, so that together you'll both be working, again, in a very connected way and in sync way for your VISTA project. Can also mean that your supervisor is more likely to advocate for you. If you need something in the project or something comes up, they can be a trusted ally as you're having these meetings and having these conversations.
So we know that a year of service as a VISTA is not without its challenges, and we want to encourage you to tap into your resources for support. Barbara and I will spend the next few minutes discussing some of the resources available to you at your site, your VISTA program, and at the Corporation for National and Community Service, or CNCS, a lot easier to say. So if we look through this, we can start with your fellow VISTAs. We want to give a shout out to the support offered by other VISTAs at your site or on your team. We encourage you to ask your fellow service members what's working well for them and tap into the resources of your peers all over the country through the VISTA campus forums. So while many of you may have other VISTAs at your site that you can talk out, communicate with, and kind of lean on each other during whether the good and the bad during your VISTA service year, we definitely realize that some of you don't have another VISTA at your site. And if you aren't aware, we certainly recommend the discussion forums. There's really good advice there on the VISTA campus, both currently with people posting now, but there's also questions that you may have that have been asked before. You could just breeze through the thread and check out what suggestions are there. It's a really good resource. So likewise, your coworkers can be an amazing source of support and assistance. They have history at the project and can give a firsthand account of what it's like to work at the organization, as well as give tips on how to succeed and thrive there. They will have those hints, tips, tricks for you. Maybe a few coffee dates with coworkers can go a long way toward helping you feel informed and supported at your site. And furthermore, your supervisor's supervisor may also be a resource and source of support for you. This can sometimes be a little tricky because, like we mentioned earlier, you typically want to avoid going over your supervisor's head when issues arise if possible. But if you really need help and you feel like you've hit a wall or just can't go any further with all the other resources at your site, you can certainly reach out to a higher level in the organization to see if they have advice for you.
So just wanted to share a couple of final reflections again from my experience being a supervisor as well as reporting to supervisors. I think I want to acknowledge, first of all, that being a supervisor is really more art than science. It is not an exact science to manage human beings with all of our great gifts. And most supervisors don't have the time that we want to really put into honing the art of supervising. As we've talked about multiple times today, we're all moving at a really fast clip. We know, supervisors know that we're not perfect. I certainly am not as a supervisor, never will be. And I know it's true for myself when I report to folks, that it can be very frustrating to find yourself in a relationship, in a supervisory relationship with someone whose style is a bad fit for you. And what I mean by that is you just think they're a bad boss. Like that's your perspective and that's your experience. What I want to recommend or really offer as a hope for you is that having a bad boss or having a supervisor who's not a good fit for you, that it can really offer very, very powerful lessons in your professional development. And I know having experienced this myself, right, I've had scary bosses. They made me try to be less scary myself. They tried to make me be more empathetic. My busy bosses have taught me to be resourceful, as I mentioned, the sharking of Eileen. The bad communicator bosses, I've tried to learn from what I've seen and what I've struggled with folks to be more articulate myself and more direct. You know, many bosses and disorganized bosses have made me more organized, maybe overly so. And then the no boundaries bosses have made me shrewd and strategic about when I give feedback and how I articulate my needs. So I share that with you all, again, just seeing some of the comments in the chat and knowing historically some of the challenges that can occur. Supervisors can be great teachers, both as role models, as I said at the beginning. You got a great supervisor, you know, drink that in, really soak that up. If you have someone who's a bad fit for you, you're feeling like he's a bad boss, then try to learn as much as you can, right? So you're not going to be that bad boss when you're in the position, and how you can take those lessons with you as you move forward. So with that, all of that said, I'm going to hand it over to Chris now to sum up what we've covered so far.
There may be times when a situation with the supervisor is too challenging for you to manage on your own. For example, if your supervisor is straight up mean to you or harasses you, if your supervisor is MIA and you don't know when you'll see them again, or if you really do have so many supervisors that you can't get any decisions made on your project, you can't progress. If you have any of these challenges or any other situation that is preventing you from having a successful VISTA service experience, we want to make sure to point you to a few other resources that should be beneficial if you're in that scenario. So, as you know, VISTA is here to help you if you have a situation that's too challenging. Your supervisor or direct supervisor is not the only form of support. Many of you may have a VISTA leader who can provide general advice, pointing you in the right direction for resources, and can serve as a liaison or facilitator for difficult conversations. Not everyone has a VISTA leader, we're aware. So definitely want to recommend a state office. Any issues you might have in terms of the overall management of the project, direction of the project, possibly its ability to attain its goals, or any issue that cannot be resolved by your supervisor, we certainly do want to point you towards your state office. We saw a little bit in the chat about, I think it was a VISTA. The conversation went fast, but I think it was a VISTA doing administrative tasks, which is a definite no-no for VISTAs. It's indirect service and not taking the place of an employee. We would certainly recommend you contact the state office if you haven't done so already. And then other VISTAs, we mentioned that previously. You know, obviously, if they're at your site, it's a great resource. Discussion forums on the VISTA campus, another great resource. And I know a few in the chat have been mentioning, you know, Facebook groups. We certainly encourage that to get support from fellow VISTAs, both who are currently serving and have served in the past and have gone through what you're going through. And as far as next steps, so we have some suggested next steps for managing up concepts, and here's just a few ideas. We would suggest maybe take time to write down a few questions that you feel are most important in establishing a great working relationship with your supervisor. Just jot a couple down, 2 or 3. The relationship building questions we review during the presentation might be a good start to help you to start this conversation at your next meeting, or you can certainly expand on those or create your own. Certainly your call. Next, we would recommend asking to set up a one-on-one meeting if you don't already have this, you know, the standard one-on-one meeting with your supervisor to discuss these new questions. If you already have it, just, you know, bring it to your next meeting and bring those 2 to 3 questions up. Similarly, also schedule a recurring one-on-one meeting with your supervisor to keep yourself on track. Bring this up to your supervisor that you would like to make it a recurring meeting. Again, we know many of you are already doing this. Others don't have any meetings. We've seen it all. But it is a good idea to build a rapport and discuss any issues that you are having. We also encourage you to try out the coin conversation model that Barbara went over. You might want to start by trying it out with just someone you trust, not necessarily your supervisor, just to see how it works, just so you can get more comfortable with it. You know, new tools can be clunky at first, so a test drive is always a good idea, both in this case and just in real life. Then when you need it, you'll have it ready to go and will feel more confident diving in. And then finally, research managing up strategies to find what works for you. The advice we're providing here is pretty applicable to a variety of situations, but you'll still need to make these strategies your own and find out what's going to work with your communication style and in your particular situation. However, we will encourage you to try something new and to push yourself out. Push it out of your comfort zone, out of the norm, just a little bit, and the rewards of your efforts may surprise you. Your VISTA experience is a great opportunity to do those types of things, to push yourself beyond those norms. And to help you out with the research piece, we did, as mentioned, include some additional links to resources in the helpful links document, which again is on just to the right of your slide. So there's some to articles that were used to help create this presentation, as well as the link to the website where you can get the one-on-one tool and an additional podcasts. There's also a link to VISTA resources should you need to tap into your CNCS support network. And again, if you aren't able to download those now, we will have those available when we post this this webinar to the VISTA campus in about a week or so. And this is just referencing those resources that are in the document. So yeah, and we'll move on. And so now that you've learned some tips, tricks, and tools for managing up, we're going to ask another chat question. What are your next steps? What's one thing from today's presentation that you may want to put into practice? We'd ask that you enter these in the chat. Hopefully you have some ideas or are able to expand on some ideas, certainly to, obviously make them your own. Just wait a second and look through some of the chat.
Rosalie's going to set up a meeting with her second supervisor. Nice. Multiple supervisor meetings. Good.
Well, I've seen a few of the 10-10-10 approach, which is great.
Yeah. Scheduling your own meeting with your own agenda. Good call.
Coin I've seen mentioned a couple of times. Setting up regular meetings, certain feedback.
Yep. Yeah, I think Chris noted this, and I think it's a great compliment to the comments you're making about having your own agenda for the 10-10-10 meetings as we were talking through. Also, if you have follow-up to your meeting, just a short email or a short memo, however you guys communicate at your site, but just something to capture what you guys discussed or decisions that were made or information that was shared. That's a great step to take as well, and that's incredibly helpful for your supervisor to have the agenda for your meetings and then just have a short summary of the meeting. I do that all the time with Eileen, and it helps her kind of keep up with the different meetings that we're having.
Great. So we'll keep monitoring as those chat responses come in. And before we get to answer a few questions, we did have a short survey where we would like to know what you thought on the webinar. We'd certainly like to know how we can improve the presentation. If you have any ideas for future webinars that we could help VISTA members, we're always striving to improve. So we'd ask that you please just take a few moments, won't take long, to complete the brief survey. As you can see, you just highlight the survey link and click Browse To. And double-clicking won't work, I don't believe, so you do have to click both. And it should only take a couple minutes, and we are going to move on to see if there are any questions while you are completing those. Moment, I don't see any, but just as a reminder, there is the Q&A pod at the bottom if you want to ask a question. You can post them there, or you can also call it in. You see the phone number at the top of the screen. And at the moment, while you're still completing those surveys, we'll just ask our operator, Steve or Colby, to provide instructions to ask a question by phone. Is it Steve?
It's Colby, actually.
It is Colby? Okay. I knew I'd get it wrong.
Well, thanks, Chris. So if you dialed into the webinar or had Adobe Connect call you back, you can ask questions using your phone. So to ask your question over the phone line, you can press *# and you'll be placed into the queue. And then when it's your turn to ask the question, you'll hear the prompt, "Go ahead, caller," and then you can proceed and ask your question. So once again, to ask a question over the phone, you can press *# to be placed in the queue.
Thanks, Colby. And I did just see one question pop up in the chat about asking if we'll send a recording of the webinar. So we won't be sending it to your email, but it will be posted to the VISTA campus in about a week or so. It'll be under the webinar, the member webinar section of the VISTA campus. Looking through.
Yeah, definitely. I see folks typing questions as well. That's terrific. And if you want to call in, we have time, I think, for 1 or 2 callers. Chris and I are both looking at the chat with our colleague Khadijah. There's a question about, I think from Jack, am I required to communicate with everyone in the office? Not knowing your situation, Jack, I don't know that we have a solid answer for you. I think we certainly want to encourage you to make sure that you and your supervisor are in close communication, and anyone who's working on your specific VISTA project. Beyond that, if you work in a larger organization that the VISTA project is housed in, I don't know how much broader your communication would need to be. From our perspective, from VISTA's perspective, you don't have to inform your entire organization, but that's a great question for your supervisor, right? Just to check in and make sure you're going as broad or as narrow as they want you to be. Any other questions?
Looks like we had a question. Can you talk about relationships with supervisors that cross contexts, I believe? So for example, church, work, family. So there could be a certain personal and professional relationship there. And yeah, that could certainly be difficult, I would imagine. And I think this may come up somewhat frequently for VISTA serving in smaller communities versus those in cities. Barbara, do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I agreed. I mean, I think that's been, we've also, I live in Baltimore, and we've had VISTA projects. We have VISTA projects in some of our neighborhood organizations where it's a city, but it's the community the VISTA is serving, live in the community. Their parents go to the site for different services. So I think it's true. It can be true in any sort of VISTA project. And I think my perception of that is all of the same rules still apply, right? Like there's still boundaries in the workplace. There's still expectations about what you need as a VISTA, what the staff need themselves on the VISTA project. Like I think all of the same rules apply. It's just the risk, right, of slipping into topics that may be off the work plan or things that may go beyond your role as a VISTA. I think the risk is higher. But I don't think any strategies, any of the communication, there's anything particularly different that I would say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
What other questions are we seeing? The question, I think, about what are our suggestions for engaging the board of directors, it looks like one of the Q&A. And I think I'll start, Chris, you probably have thoughts on this as well. I think that obviously depends on your structure within your organization. If your project, if you have direct access to the board, then I would think it would make sense that you would talk with your supervisor about those communications and how best to engage them. My perspective and my experience with board members is that my board members love to be informed and hyper-informed, kind of over-informed about everything. They did not love being asked to do things. So I think I had to really work hard to align my expectations about how much I could get my board, physically to show up and do things at particular service projects, but they loved to be informed about the projects. So I think depending on your situation and your supervisor's role with the board, I think that really informs it. But it could be super hands-on or not as close.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. And I think, like you mentioned, it certainly depends on kind of the dynamic at your site. As we talked about briefly and earlier in the slides, you want to make sure you're not necessarily, at least as a first step, you're not necessarily going over the head of your supervisor. If you wanted to speak directly to the board, we would certainly recommend talking it out with your supervisor first. But if you have some ideas, you feel like they're not getting addressed or just want to reach out, sometimes it may be necessary, just in a polite manner and professional manner, reaching out and and taking that first step or initiative.
Thank you. So a couple of different comments about how to deal when there are multiple VISTAs with common issues with the same supervisor, what to do when you have different supervisors with different kinds of issues. And I think again, from my perspective, all of these approaches are the same, whether it's your direct supervisor or you're a leader and you have VISTAs working in a project. I think we always want to encourage the regular meetings scheduled. We want the direct communication using the COIN model. I mean, the tools that we talked about, I think, are relevant and just may have to be done with more than one person. There may be more than one supervisor or more than one project you have to work with. Any other questions, Chris, that you're seeing? It doesn't look at this point like there's anyone on the phone. Just doing a quick check on the chat box or the Q&A. Any other questions we want to address?
Looking through, and you answered that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it looks like if we could, Colby or Steve, if we could show the links again, remove the survey and display the handout links. A number of folks in the chat box were asking for that. Yep, looks like that should be back on your screen now. So you can scroll over to get the links to that Managing Your Boss article that Chris and I mentioned, as well as a number of the other resources as well.
So I think we are out of time, unfortunately. We do see a couple of questions that came in, and we'll try to respond to those separately. It's a good reminder to have your email address up to date in your My AmeriCorps account so that when we do follow up, it goes to your correct email. So for those of you who just submitted those questions, we'll get back to you. But we are going to have to wrap this up. So we want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today, and hope you learned something, and hope you're able to take this into your VISTA service to be more productive with your supervisors and have a better relationship. And be on the lookout for next month's webinar. And from all of us here at VISTA and CNCS, we want to thank you for your service.